there is no question for us to give any dividend. Leave aside this thing, we are still struggling because we are competing with the existing, say, infrastructure project debt rate. We are at par with that, or a real estate debt for that matter. So we are struggling still with that. That is exactly what I am saying. There are no special funds which are made available to such, these are actually public utility, hardcore infrastructure. So there's no mechanism in place to say subsidize it with a cheaper debt or longer term debt. There's no struck this thing. Reserve Bank of India, although has just come up with something called 525, but that also is not good enough for a project of our type, which has a much longer gestation, because the city side pays for the airport, and the airport is already up and running as per the agreement which we had with the government when the land was acquired.
Mr. Bapani, so where does the Bangalore airport stand in its timeline in terms of return on equity?
Return on equity is something I'll keep quiet about. Yeah, because effectively, if you look at it, we've so far had only one declaration of dividend last year. But in terms of what the challenges we face today is how to anticipate and manage growth. The traffic is growing, and we basically need to invest very quickly, not just in the airport infrastructure. I think the bigger challenges would be accessibility to the airport. For that, we are working closely with state government, and hopefully the support is coming in.
Yes, indeed.
On that topic, I just have a follow-on for Mr. Pramod. While the dividend has been non-existent, but what's been the kind of the general, I would say, experience that you have on the financial return side? And yours is one airport which has kind of seen significant investment activity on the acquisition side. Does that create a bar for you in terms of, is it attractive enough for you to continue to have high degree of appetite to invest more into the sector? Or is this something you think does not kind of meet your bar at a kind of a global level, treasury level, that the returns are just too back-ended and just too low?
You know, it's not just the returns, it's the overall environment of investment. Our experience has been good, effectively, if you look at it, but if you go into do we have so much time to pursue each project? Probably we don't. Yeah, that's one aspect of it. So do we have the appetite to manage the environment the way it was done in case of Bangalore Airport? Probably not. Yeah, those are, and whatever capital we have, it's chasing the opportunities around the globe. Unlike lots of Indian developers who must first invest into the country and then start branching out, for a multinational or an international investor, the choices are available, and the capital is competing.
Can I ask you, since you just mentioned this perspective of local and international investor, how important do you feel a good local partner is? Would Siemens feel okay to invest solely in an Indian airport without a local partner?
Not really. I think I can say that very honestly. We would need local partners to manage the environment and lots of these challenges that we face. So a good local partner would be absolutely a must for us, including maybe a very good operator as well.
I see. Thank you. If you don't mind, we'll move back to our initial plan, and I'll ask Mr. Sonal Mishra, could you please dwell on the sort of consultant's perspective of a wider view of the current dynamics of the aviation market and challenges of its development, mid, long term, and in particular, what do you think of the current regulatory framework? Is there anything you perceive that should be done to make it even more efficient, to make sure that the national portfolio of new airports develops as scheduled or even faster?
Thank you, Sergey. Before I answer the question, I would like to take a step back and just dwell more upon the dynamics of aviation that is happening in India. So currently, as we are all, even the past presenters have highlighted this point, that India is expected to become one of the largest market in aviation, and it's growing at a phenomenally good rate of 15 to 16% for over the last 2 to 3 years. But in our opinion, in the next 15 years, the value drivers driving this growth will change. So currently, there are around 70% traffic that is being driven by tier 1 airports, Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and some more. But we believe that going forward, in the next 10 years or 15 years, this scenario will change, and more than 50% of the traffic will come from tier 2 to tier 3 cities. Now, this itself will have a very significant impact on the way the airport sector is being looked upon in India. So, more from tier 1, the focus will shift from tier 2 to tier 3 cities. And then we will have similar challenges as what has been highlighted by Mr. Ghosh, that how to make these airports viable. Specifically, even if we say, and these airports will be handling around 70 of new airports will be handling more than 1.5 million passengers. And how to make these airports viable, and how to successfully bring investment, foreign investment or private investment in these type of airports. So therefore, there has to be successful project, or there has to be innovative project structuring that needs to be undertaken. And that is where I think the time is ripe that we need to think about what can be different out of the box thought processes that can make these tier 2 and tier 3 airports viable. Some of, in my opinion, some of the things that we can consider is the outlook of the government as well as the regulator needs to change from looking airport as a project to looking airport as a program. Now, when I say program, it doesn't mean that there has to be a bundle of 2 to 3 airports clubbed together and then bid out to the market, and each 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever that number can be chosen in a way so that the risk can be more appropriately balanced across. What are the risks? The risks are related to traffic. The risk is related to the capital investment, and in the current regime, the high yields because of the cost plus approach, the new airports that come up, that initially the initial user has to fund the future user's requirement. So the initial yields are extremely high, which make the project unbankable. So if there is a program of airports, suppose let's say a program A comprising of 5 airports, then the capital investment may be apportioned across these 4 or 5 airports, or maybe apportioned across time, which in turn will not only allow, and all this program has to be treated as one airport, maybe an airport with having campuses at 4 or 5 different places, so that in an overall level, the yield goes down. When the yields goes down, since the overall program has a larger traffic base, it will be able to sustain its debt service. So things like that needs to be looked and taken into perspective. And that's where the regulatory innovation that you were talking about needs to come in, that currently the regulation has undertaken a phenomenal, I would say a quantum jump from a single till to a hybrid till, and gradually it should move, it has to, I believe, move more towards the market-based approach as the regulation in port sector is gradually moving. So airport sector will also gradually move more towards the market-based approach. But then a program-based approach, and a regulator should accept that program, is also a need of the hour, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You know, just to add to what Sonal had said, I think the key thing is to look at the tier 2, tier 3 cities, because the 70% you can't really push too much now. And there I'd like to give the example of, for example, the Cochin Airport. Now, in 1999, they started with an investment of about 300 crores. And today, the Cochin Airport this year has made a profit of 200 crores. And there is hardly any landing, everything is very, very low. So when I talk to investors, I think this is the kind of models that we really have to look at. how do we look at 5, 6 tier 2 cities where we can put all our effort instead of spreading too much? If we can look at now, I am on the board and on the strategy committee of Kannur Airport, which is being inaugurated by January, February. It's the same kind of model where there is all, shareholders are all, small shareholders, NRIs from the Middle East. But that model is working very well. For example, the government is a major shareholder, and you will be interested to know the main shareholder on behalf of the government is the Kerala Beverages Corporation. So the chaps, and Kerala has the largest per capita alcohol drinkers in the country. So they are contributing to this airport. So what I am trying to say is that we must have novel ways of, innovative ways of financing these things, and both these airports have financially closed, they are coming through. So I just wanted to emphasize this aspect of looking at tier 2, tier 3 cities where there is potential instead of going all over and then looking at where it can happen. So if we have that model, it will work well, because I think the bigger cities, the 4 metros which have 70%, the next 100 million traffic will, as Sonal said, come from these areas. So we must really address that, look at how we develop the airport and the aerotropolis model. Kannur, for example, we are already looking at anchor industries before the airport opens, so that there is that kind of thing. That holistic kind of thing would be very helpful. I just thought, Mr.
I'd wanted to ask Mr. Koch whether you would be interested in a sort of programmatic approach that Mr. Mishra suggested. But before you respond to that, just trying to play devil's advocate, I'm still trying to figure what the programmatic approach would allow to do, because say in Russian experience, which I know best, there's only top 10 airports which are financially attractive for an investor who could attempt investing in them without any public support. Elsewhere, the only solution which was found in our market was asking for grants and bundling a few small airports with, of course, the overall number of traffic number is greater, but these are still quite unique assets. It's not single design schools or hospitals which you could save on due diligence, on design. And the risks which they pose, they probably don't cancel each other out. They still are risks of Indian airport market. So I was wondering whether with this sort of counter-argument, whether you would feel comfortable or interested in a program of smaller tier 2, tier 3 airports.
Very much. This is actually not the way. This is the only way. The program is the only way where you club a couple of them, you lose some, you win some, on the whole you make a progress. That is how you will be able to. But having said that, there is also, sir will agree because he has been part of the government all his life, that there has to be a seamless approach between the state and the center. Because as I said, aviation is a federal subject, whereas land and local priorities remain a state subject. So until and unless a framework is created so that both work hand to hand, for a private investor, government is one entity. Private investor, you forget the international investor. I am talking even for the domestic investor, the moment you ask them to knock more than 2, 3, 4 doors, you won't find them. And that is precisely the reason we have not been able to attract enough of investment into this particular sector, in spite of the phenomenal growth that we have seen over the last decade or so. The aviation industry has been going, we don't need to say, everyone knows here. But as I said, it is just because of lack of a proper framework. This program is the only way it can go forward, if you ask me. But it has to be clubbed together. I'll give you one small example, although this is not exactly relevant. We had participated in Jaipur Ahmedabad, the bid which Honorable Minister spoke in the morning. With all due respect, it is nothing but an enhanced housekeeping contract that they have given. There's no scope for anyone to invest on the capital part, capex part of it. So where does the return come from? And even after 7 or 8 rounds of pre-bid meetings, the final solution or the final bid terms which has come, we saw the numbers that there are 12 bidders in Ahmedabad, 8 bidders in Jaipur. Let's wait and see what is the final fate when it comes to submission. It doesn't happen that way, it doesn't work that way. You have to look at the investor's interest as well. Unfortunately, the framework has not yet got cleared up to that extent.
Thank you. Would you like to respond as well? Yes, please.
Just to little bit explain more what I was trying to say. Let's say there is an airport A, which is growing at a phenomenally good traffic. There is a good traffic base, but it is capacity constrained. Whatever you do after 15 years, this airport cannot be expanded. Now there is another small airport, let's say a few hundred kilometers away, which currently doesn't have anything as its own. But if the two airports are clubbed into a program, now what the benefit will happen? If if the airport B is developed on a standalone basis, since it is at a very small town or a small place, even whatever amount of capital expenditure you do, the per pax yield according to the current regulation, the amount will be, it will just make it unviable. No banks will be able to fund that project. Now if you club the two, then it gives comfort that under one single SPV, there are 2 airports. And initially for the first 15 years, the private player will focus only on airport A. But after that airport gets choked, then it has a ready-made airport where it can expand. That is to address the demand risk and the capacity expansion risk. On the yield part, what makes airport B automatically feasible is that whatever capex that you do, it gets apportioned across both the airports. But in the denominator, since airport A has a very high traffic, the per pax yield comes phenomenally low, which makes it attractive for people to start using that airport, which will make bankers and financiers more comfortable to use airport B. So this is, in my opinion, it's a win-win situation for all the players.
Thank you very much for this clarification. In my mind, this nuance helped me to understand that it's not just bundling 3 very small tier 3 city airports at the same stage of development. It really matters what kind of airports you bundle. Then it makes sense. Can I move over to Mr. Amit Nair and ask you for your view on as someone who currently helps the state-owned wealth fund to find investment opportunities, and someone who was helping to attract foreign direct investment and possibly institutional investors into the infrastructure marketplace in India. So how efficient today is private finance mobilization in India, and maybe what measures could the Indian authorities, the aviation market, take to make the FDI, institutional investors, including overseas sovereign wealth funds, pay more interest and participate in those bids, go for more M&A activity?
Thanks, Sergey, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to comment on this topic. I think there's been a lot that's been spoken since morning, and there have been various stakeholders, the government on one side, the private operators on the other side, industry consultants, and there's been a range of issues that have been touched here. I can give a bit of the investor side of it, and I currently wear a hat which is working with the government on the NIIF, which has, I think Dr. Vasu, I think he commented on the role that NIIF is intended to play, and kind of there's a path forward on that one. And there is a hat that I used to wear, which was more investment banker hat, which was kind of in the business of raising capital, and I think Siddharth touched upon kind of various capital raising efforts, as well as kind of mobilizing strategic as well as institutional capital into the sector. I think while the high level, the macro thesis, I don't think there is anyone in this room who argues against the macro thesis here, which is the growth is probably unparalleled when we look at some of the other competing markets. The size and the scale kind of warrants large-scale investments coming into the country. There is a broader backdrop of political and economic stability. There is multiple opportunities which are out there to be tapped, both primarily on the brownfield side as well as on the greenfield side. But when we actually look through what's the kind of the report card looks like? The report card actually kind of looks like as pretty, I would say, below average to poor. After about 12, 13 years, what we have is kind of 2 domestic airport operators who are running 4 airports, and they've had, I think Dr. Vasu touched upon that point, they've had kind of financial issues from a balance sheet standpoint, and then you have 3 participants as strategic investors who are actually foreign strategic investors who are actually playing a non-strategic role in the investments that they have. And what we see progressively, the interest kind of seems kind of coming down. The 2 things that kind of underline which kind of get underlined for me as someone who's kind of been on either side of the table is the concept of certainty and the concept of control. The philosophy of certainty, and that can be kind of broadly the bucket of all the things that have been talked about in detail, and I would not kind of go listing down each one of them, but the aspect around ability to predict in a narrow band of tolerance what the economic outcomes would be, and their ability to kind of price those outcomes is eventually what the investors want to see. So whether these are capital market investors or long-term sovereign wealth funds, any one of them, and they don't have that certainty here. I think there's been multiple such cases, whether it's kind of timelines, land acquisition, hybrid till, single till, double till, there's been kind of whole range of issues. So I think one thing is, from a government standpoint, is to kind of provide that certainty. The second aspect is the control aspect, and when I say control, it's not kind of control in the literal sense. It's the kind of the philosophy of thinking and kind of feeling confident whether you really have your destiny in your own hands. And at one level, I think the comment that I think Pramod made, which is kind of slightly concerning for me, is as an international investor, you should feel confident enough to kind of operate in this environment, rather than being thinking that I need a local partner to manage this environment. And I think that kind of automatically starts creating a bit of a friction and misalignment of interest and kind of ceding of control from an investor standpoint. And when they feel ceding of control, that automatically raises the kind of the bar of the cost of capital and the kind of the expectation from a return perspective, because at the end of the day, they have a global portfolio, there is limited amount of capital, and they have multiple investment opportunities, and they'll probably want to go to a destination where they get the kind of probably the perfect balance between the risk, reward, and the resources that they're kind of employing. And that eventually is, I think, at the core of what's kind of playing the sector from an investor standpoint. Again, I think somebody had put on a slide in one of the earlier sessions around the whole London's kind of the whole airport ecosystem and how there have been multiple players. And if you actually look through the transactional side of these airports, they've been significant and large ticket transactions that have happened where there are multiple rounds of new investors kind of coming in and taking out the previous investors. And these are long-term patient capital which is kind of chasing these investments. So as a theme, as a global theme, there is enough and more capital out there for these kind of assets. And we've seen whether it's the Canadians, whether it's the kind of the sovereign wealth funds who have ability to finance these assets, because that's kind of the risk characteristics of their own liabilities, that they want to fund these assets. But at the same time, I think in India, we're trying to give them a bit of a skewed risk reward kind of a scenario, which is where there's a bit of a mismatch. And when there is a mismatch, I think the natural reaction for these investors would be to want to sit back and wait for the right time and the right models to be offered, and eventually kind of not invest and sit on the sideline. That's potentially what has happened. And I think the point that I think Siddharthan made in respect to shareholder returns, I think if you look at the track record the last 12 to 13 years, obviously the shareholder returns is probably one thing which has been lacking, and which is probably should be the kind of the starting point if you want to attract investments. And within that, I'll probably want to just kind of add one more layer to it. I think the shareholder returns are also differential. There is a difference between the shareholder returns that the Indian promoters have made versus the shareholder returns that the foreign investors who have kind of stepped in at different points of time in these projects. So there is a disparity in that too, which at some level creates a bit of a misalignment of interest as well as kind of a lack of confidence. So we'll probably going to stop there and answer any questions or any comments.
You know, on the shareholder return and this investments, since I was very closely associated with the Dial and Vial. I don't know whether anybody is there from, yes, 2008 to 11 we did the airport. About 20,000 crores was what was given, I think, between GVK and this thing to the airport authority. But when you look at the kind of returns, so I think in order to attract investments, we must really look at how we can maximize it, and it is very good that there has been a new regulatory till. There has also been renegotiation. The KELCA has come out with many things. But I think it's very important to see how we can do this course correction to attract new investors, because as the MOPA and the Navi Bombay has clearly shown, the investor interest is not very much because these earlier people on the block are really suffering. So we really have to see what is the kind of course correction we have to do to get this investor return. And I'm very happy that many things have been done by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, including the regulator. I think they've taken a very proactive stance, and I think it's important to really look at this and have a very strong dispute resolution mechanism which is happening, so that these things will not affect more investments coming in. And I think when you look at the kind of world quality airports that have come up, at that time by these new investors who had come in now 5-6 years, I think there is a lot to be said to see how that can be enhanced and encourage more investors with this 100% FDI. I think much more tweaking is required to give them that necessary comfort level to come in and do this.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
Sergey, one comment here. It's not just airports where the international developers, we don't see so many. It's across. You'll see the power, you see the transportation. So there is something fundamentally wrong, and we need to introspect in terms of what is going wrong here, that we do not have this traction.
From my perspective, from some other markets, I guess what you are saying for me resonated with my perceptions that quite often PPPs, if regulated industries, infrastructure sector, is in a way underpriced, because as an asset there is attention to attach quasi-sovereign rating to PPPs, because there is the state of the region behind the project. Whereas in fact, in some geographies, a greater role of the state could be a greater source of risk, and regulatory risk was mentioned here as #1 risk. So international investors, particularly the long-term horizon ones, they see it fairly, but the local development banks, the local participants, they have a lot of political pressure, I believe, to participate in a can't miss out psychology. So maybe this also has a role in this pricing aspect. So, but we are close to running out of our time, so I would love to let Mr. Nambiar conclude this session, because you, as a former Secretary of the Civil Aviation Ministry, and your other previous positions with the government, you led the major national and state level infrastructure programs. So there's been some time that you have not been really driving it. So having taken this step back, what's your overall view where the aviation market in India is now in terms of attracting private investment?
I must compliment the Ministry of Civil Aviation for the new civil aviation policy, which I think has done a lot of stakeholder consultations and come out with a very proactive policy. But the implementation, we really have to wait and see how we can really implement many of these things. Because one of the important points that really didn't come up, and which is worrisome, is the health of the airlines. Now you see, you can't have an airport without airlines. And this year, we have, I think, a cumulative loss of about 85 million. So this is something that also we need to address and see whether the state governments can help on the ATF and with the GST, because this is again a very serious issue, the health of the airlines. And even the UDAN program, which I think is very important, it will allow the common man to travel. but the smaller airlines, we have a tradition in India of them all so far, most of them folding up. We really don't have any airline that has not folded up. And so this again is very worrisome if you're going to stretch it to these smaller areas. One is the airlines, the second is the airports, because many of these small strips, so these are some tweaking on the policy that we really have to do. And I think what is really important is the role of the state governments, as we keep mentioning, because many states have very robust industrial development corporation, infrastructure corporations. And these we really have to give them an important role in the airport development. Because, for example, the Tamil Nadu Industrial Development Corporation, at one point when we wanted to do the Chennai airport. So I think it's important for the government of India to work with the state governments on this airport development. That would really help a lot. And then with the new policy, I think it's important to really have very many more stakeholder consultations to see how we could do this, and see what are some of the best practices happening, like again, the Cochin airport and others, with minimum cost. I think a key lesson from Cochin, Kannur and all is that you are keeping the cost to minimal, and that I think would be important when we go to 2 and 3 tier cities. So this is what I wanted to just say. Thank you.
Thank you, and unless there is any other comment from the panel, it's been an honor to share this session with you. Thank you very much, and I believe it may be lunch now.
Please stay back for a minute. I request Mr. Samolis as the session chairperson to please present mementos to the panelists, beginning with Mr. Sonal Mishra, Director, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Mr. Amit Nair, NIF, ex-Goldman Sachs. Mr. Pramod Bambani, Executive Vice President and Head of Financing, South Asia Siemens Limited. Mr. M. Madhavan Nambiar, former Secretary, Ministry of Civil Aviation. And Mr. Partha Ghosh, Managing Director, Bengal Erythropolis PAPL. I now request Dr. Lalit Kanodia, President-elect, IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to please present a memento to Mr. Sergei Samolis, Director, PPP Experts. Mr. Kanodia has come. Thank you, Dr. Kanodia. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, it is 1:40 now. I think 30 minutes should suffice for lunch. Yes? Yes. So I don't think I'll be asking too much if I request you to be back in the next half an hour and we continue with the conference sessions. We have a long day to go yet. Many power-packed sessions to go. Please reassemble in the said time. Thank you.